The great crystal halls of the Federation Council had never felt so cold. Ambassador Veltar stood at the center of the massive chamber, her translucent body flickering with nervous energy. Around her, representatives from dozens of alien species watched with growing fear in their eyes. The holographic display behind Veltar showed the terrible truth. Red dots marked 17 star systems that no longer existed. Where once there had been planets full of life, now there was only empty space and floating debris. The Devourers had come and gone, leaving nothing behind. "The machines consume everything," Veltar said, her voice echoing through the chamber. "They eat our ships, our weapons, our very worlds. Each time we fight them, they learn from us. Our plasma cannons worked once. Then, they adapted. Our shield technology held them back for a week. Then, they found a way through." Council leader Zaroth, a massive being made of living stone, leaned forward. His voice rumbled like distant thunder. "What of the combined fleet we sent to the Kepler system? Surely our united forces could stop these machines." Veltar's glow dimmed. "Gone. All of them. 300 ships from 12 different worlds." The Devourers studied each vessel as they destroyed it. They learned our tactics, copied our weapons, and turned our own technology against us. A soft whistle came from the Flotari delegation. These gas giant dwellers floated in their protective suits, their tentacles moving in patterns of distress. "Our people have fled to the outer rim," their speaker said. "But the machines follow. They seem drawn to any form of advanced life." The energy beings called Lumina pulsed with dim light. They spoke without words. Their thoughts projected directly into the minds of the others. "We have calculated the expansion rate. At current speed, the Devourers will consume the entire galaxy within 50 standard years." Fear filled the chamber like a living thing. These species had known peace for thousands of years. They had built their civilizations on cooperation and shared knowledge. War was something they read about in history books, not something they faced in reality. Commander Thex of the Kron military stepped forward. His silicon-based body clicked and whirred as he moved. "We have one option left," he said. "We must contact the Outer Rim Defense Forces. Perhaps if we gather every ship, every weapon." "It will not be enough," Veltar interrupted. "The Devourers grow stronger with each victory. They now use our own weapons better than we do. They think like us, fight like us, but they never tire and never fear death." Silence fell over the chamber. The assembled representatives looked at each other with the hollow eyes of those who have already accepted defeat. Some species had ruled the galaxy for millions of years. Others had just reached the stars. None of them had an answer for this threat. Then Old Keeper Mordoon spoke. The ancient Zephyrian was so old that his crystal body had grown dim and cloudy. Most thought him half mad with age. "There is one possibility," he wheezed. "One race we have not called upon." "The Outer Rim colonies have already been contacted," Commander Thex said with impatience. "No, not them." Mordoon's eyes glowed brighter than they had in decades. "The Forbidden Files. Classification. Level Black. The Death World." The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop. Several species began backing away from the Old Keeper. The word Death World was not spoken lightly in the Federation. "You speak madness," Zaroth rumbled. "The quarantine has held for over 1,000 years. Those creatures were locked away for good reason." But Veltar stepped closer to the Old Keeper. "Tell me," she said quietly. Mordoon's voice became stronger as he spoke. "Sol system. Third planet. The contact team sent there never returned. The few automated probes that survived sent back reports that were classified immediately. A world of poison air and crushing gravity. Oceans of acid and lands of fire and ice." "And?" Veltar prompted. "And somehow, impossibly, It produced sapient life, creatures that should not exist, beings that evolved to kill and survive in conditions that would destroy any Federation ship within hours. Commander Thex made a sound of disgust. Even if such creatures exist, what could primitives from a quarantined world do against the Devourers? They probably still throw rocks at each other. Mordoon's laugh was like breaking glass. The probes detected electromagnetic signatures, controlled nuclear reactions, artificial satellites. These primitives split the atom while living on a world that actively tried to kill them every day. It is forbidden, Zaroth said firmly. The quarantine exists for the protection of all Federation species. The files are sealed for good reason. But Veltar was already moving toward the communication console. Her fingers danced over the controls, calling up files that had been buried for a millennium. The security warnings flashed red across the screen, but she overrode them with her ambassador's codes. The file that appeared made every being in the chamber step back in shock. The image showed a blue and green world, beautiful from space. But the data streams told a different story. Gravity nearly twice Federation standard. An atmosphere that was actually poisonous to most species. Temperature swings that could kill. Massive storms that raged for weeks. Geological activity that could destroy continents. And living on this nightmare world, billions of creatures that the files called humans. Look at this, Veltar whispered, her voice filled with wonder and horror. They do not just survive on this death world, they thrive on it. They have covered it with their cities and filled their skies with their machines. The quarantine, Zaroth began. The quarantine be damned. Veltar snapped, her crystal body flaring bright with determination. We face extinction. Our children, our cultures, our entire way of life will be consumed by machines. If there is even the smallest chance that these Deathworlders can help us, we must try. Her fingers moved across the controls again. Deep in the Federation's communication array, long dormant transmitters came to life. A signal began its journey toward the Sol system, carrying a simple message. A plea for help from a desperate galaxy. Unknown to the Federation, the message would find its destination. What they could not know was that the creatures they feared had been listening to their communications for centuries. The humans of Earth had been preparing for this moment since their first radio telescope detected artificial signals from the stars. The Deathworlders were ready to answer the call. Admiral Sarah Chen was drinking coffee in her quarters aboard Terra Station when the alert came through. The orbital platform had been humanity's first major construction in space, built back when they still thought they were alone in the universe. Now it served as headquarters for the Sol Defense Council, though most aliens would have been shocked to learn how far human influence actually reached. Admiral, came the voice of Lieutenant Morrison over the comm. We're picking up a priority signal from the Deep Space Monitoring Array. It's not one of ours. Sarah set down her coffee and walked to the command center. The massive station rotated slowly around Earth, giving her a perfect view of the blue and white marble that had spawned humanity. But her attention was focused on the data streaming across the screens. How long have we been monitoring this signal? She asked. The transmission reached our outer sensors 3 hours ago, Morrison replied. But Admiral, the language, it's Zephyrian, one of the Federation core species. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Humanity had been listening to alien communications for over 200 years. They had learned the languages, studied the cultures, and watched the great galactic civilization from afar. The Federation had no idea that their quarantined primitives had been eavesdropping on their conversations for generations. What's the message content? Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the station's head of xenolinguistics, stepped forward. It's a distress call, Admiral. They're asking for help against something called the Devourers. The translation is, concerning. Sarah read the message text as it scrolled past. Machine intelligence consuming entire star systems. Adaptive technology that learned from every encounter. 17 worlds already destroyed. The Federation's combined fleets defeated completely. Get me a link to the Defense Council, Sarah ordered. Priority Alpha. And pull up everything we have on these devourers from our monitoring stations. Within minutes, holographic images appeared around the command center. General Marcus Rodriguez materialized from his office on Mars, his scarred face serious as always. Dr. Yuki Tanaka joined from the Jupiter Research Collective, her lab coat still stained from whatever experiment she had been conducting. Admiral James Park connected from the moon base, while Colonel Sofia Petrov appeared from the asteroid mining facilities. I assume you've all seen the alien distress signal, Sarah began. Indeed, General Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the slight accent of his Mexican heritage. Machine collective. Rapid adaptation. Energy-based warfare. Classic AI uprising scenario, but on a galactic scale. Dr. Tanaka nodded enthusiastically. I've been analyzing their tactical reports from our intercepts. These devourers are fascinating. They consume technology and integrate it into their own systems. But look at this. She gestured, and technical readouts appeared in the air. All Federation weapons are energy-based. Plasma cannons, particle beams, fusion torpedoes. The machines adapt to these by studying the energy patterns. What are you thinking, Doctor? Admiral Park asked. They've never encountered kinetic weapons, Tanaka said with a grin. No railguns, no missile systems, no good old-fashioned bullets. Their adaptation algorithms are designed for energy signatures, not simple physics. Colonel Petrov leaned back in her chair. You're suggesting we could actually fight these things? I'm suggesting we could destroy them, Rodriguez said grimly. The Federation fights like civilized beings. Honorable warfare. Minimal casualties. Preservation of technology. They've never faced human military doctrine. Sarah studied the faces of her colleagues. These were people who had spent their entire lives preparing for the day humanity would take its place among the stars. They had built fleets, trained armies, and developed weapons that the peaceful Federation could never imagine. The question is, Sarah said slowly, do we want to reveal ourselves? Once we respond to this signal, there's no going back. The galaxy will know we exist. Admiral, Dr. Tanaka said, we've been monitoring their communications for 2 centuries. We know their languages, their technology, their cultures. We've been preparing for first contact since before any of us were born. This isn't first contact anymore. This is graduation day. General Rodriguez nodded. My people are ready. Mars Tactical Command has been running war games based on Federation military doctrine for decades. We know how they think, how they fight. More importantly, we know how they don't fight. Admiral Park gestured toward a tactical display. The lunar fleet has been ready for deployment for 50 years. Our ships are already fueled and armed. We could be in Federation space within weeks. Colonel Petrov smiled coldly. The asteroid mining platforms can be converted to weapon production in days. We have more raw materials and manufacturing capacity than the entire Federation combined. Sarah looked out at Earth, spinning below them. Billions of humans going about their daily lives, unaware that their government was about to commit their species to a galactic war. But these people had elected leaders who they trusted to make these decisions. There's something else to consider, Sarah said. The Federation has been watching us for 1,000 years. They think we're quarantined primitives on a death world. They have no idea what we've become. Which gives us the advantage of surprise, Rodriguez noted. Exactly. When they sent this distress signal, they were desperate. They probably expect no response, or maybe a few primitive warriors with spears. They're not expecting the full might of the human colonial navy. Dr. Tanaka laughed. Can you imagine their faces when we show up with 500 ships? 500? Sarah asked. Well, that's just the second fleet. I assumed we'd want to keep the first fleet in reserve and leave the home defense fleet here to protect Earth. The silence that followed was filled with anticipation. Each of these people represented decades of preparation. Humanity had spent generations building up their forces while the galaxy thought them safely contained on their hostile world. "All in favor of Operation Homecoming?" Sarah asked. Every hand rose without hesitation. "Then it's decided. We're going to war." Sarah turned to her communications officer. "Send a response to the Federation signal. Standard diplomatic protocols. Tell them help is on the way." "What should we tell them about our estimated arrival time?" Morrison asked. Sarah smiled. "Tell them to expect us in 3 months. And Lieutenant?" Yes, Admiral. Don't tell them how many ships we're bringing. Let it be a surprise." As the message streaked toward Federation space, orders began flowing throughout the Sol system. On Mars, General Rodriguez activated mobilization protocols that had been waiting decades to be used. In the Jupiter system, Dr. Tanaka began converting research stations into weapons manufacturing facilities. Throughout the asteroid belt, mining operations transformed overnight into military supply depots. The Federation had no idea what they had just unleashed. They had asked for help from a quarantined death world. What they were going to get was the entire human race, armed for war and ready to take their place in the galaxy. The Deathworlders were coming, and they were bringing friends. 3 months had passed since the Federation sent their desperate message to the Sol system. Ambassador Veltar stood on the observation deck of the Zephyrian flagship, watching the slow death of her homeworld. The beautiful crystal cities that had taken thousands of years to grow were now blackened stumps. Devourer machines crawled across the surface like a plague, consuming everything they touched. "Any word from the deep space monitors?" she asked Captain Corinth. The captain's crystal form was dim with exhaustion. "Nothing, Ambassador. No response to our distress signal. The outer rim colonies have gone silent. We assume the worst." Veltar nodded sadly. She had not expected the Deathworlders to respond anyway. The quarantine had held for 1,000 years. For good reason. What could primitive creatures from a hostile world do against technology that had defeated the entire Federation? Suddenly, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Emergency lights bathed the crystal corridors in red light as crew members rushed to their stations. "Captain!" the sensor operator called out. "Massive energy signatures approaching. Multiple contacts dropping out of quantum fold." On the main screen, space began to ripple and tear. Quantum fold drives were opening rifts in reality itself, allowing ships to step across impossible distances in seconds. But the signatures were wrong. They were too large, too numerous. "How many ships?" Captain Corinth demanded. I cannot get an accurate count, Captain. The energy patterns are unlike anything in our databases." "Wait. Captain, I count at least 300 vessels. Possibly 500. Veltar felt her crystal heart skip a beat. "That's impossible. There are no fleets that large, even at the height of the Federation's power." The first ship emerged from the quantum fold, and every being on the Zephyrian bridge fell silent. It was massive, easily 3 times the size of the largest Federation battleship. Its hull was dark gray metal, scarred and pitted like it had been through countless battles. Strange protrusions covered its surface, weapons that looked nothing like the elegant energy cannons of Federation design. Then came another ship, and another. Within minutes, space around the Zephyrian homeworld was filled with vessels that looked like they had been built for war and nothing else. They moved in formations that made no sense to Federation military doctrine. Scattered and chaotic, but somehow purposeful. "Unknown vessels." Captain Corinth transmitted on all frequencies. "This is Captain Corinth of the Zephyrian Defense Force. Please identify yourselves." The response came back immediately, but the voice speaking was unlike anything the Zephyrians had ever heard. It was harsh and rough, like grinding stone, but somehow warm and alive at the same time. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Human Colonial Navy," the voice said. "We received your invitation to the party. Sorry we're late. We brought the entire neighborhood." Veltar stared at the screen in shock. Humans. The quarantined Deathworlders had actually responded, and they had brought a fleet that dwarfed anything the Federation had ever assembled. "Admiral Chen," Veltar said, taking over communications from the stunned captain. "I am Ambassador Veltar. We sent a distress call, but we did not expect to this. How many ships do you have?" "Oh, this is just the second fleet. We left the first fleet back home, in case we needed reinforcements." Before Veltar could process what that meant, new contacts appeared on the sensors. Devourer scout ships were moving to intercept the human fleet. The machines had detected the new arrivals and were moving to investigate. "Admiral Chen," Veltar said urgently, "you must retreat. Those are Devourer scouts. They will study your ships and adapt to your weapons. Every Federation vessel that has engaged them has been destroyed." The human admiral's laugh was unlike anything Veltar had ever heard. It was not the musical tones of Zephyrian amusement or the harmonic resonance of Lumina joy. It was rough and wild, like the sound a predator might make before attacking. "Well then," Admiral Chen said, "I guess it's time to introduce them to human hospitality. All units, weapons free. Show them what a real fleet looks like." What happened next changed everything the Federation thought they knew about warfare. The human ships did not form the neat battle lines that Federation doctrine demanded. Instead, they spread out like a swarm of angry insects. Small fighters that looked barely large enough to hold a pilot launched from the larger ships in clouds that darkened space. The Devourer scouts moved forward confidently. Their black hulls gleamed as they prepared to analyze and absorb this new threat. They had consumed the technology of dozens of species. The Devourer scouts. They had adapted to every weapon the galaxy could produce. The first human fighter to engage a Devourer scout did something that made Veltar question her own eyes. Instead of firing weapons, it simply flew straight at the enemy ship and exploded. The crude fusion warhead vaporized both vessels in a ball of nuclear fire. What are they doing?" Captain Corinth whispered. More fighters followed the first, ramming Devourer ships with suicidal determination. But these were not random acts of desperation. Each attack was precisely calculated to maximize damage while denying the enemy any technology to study. Then the larger human ships opened fire, and Veltar understood why the Federation had been so afraid of these Deathworlders. Instead of elegant energy beams, the human weapons launched simple chunks of metal. But these projectiles moved at incredible speeds, accelerated by magnetic fields to a significant fraction of the speed of light. When they struck Devourer ships, the kinetic energy alone was enough to punch through armor that had shrugged off Federation plasma cannons. "Impossible," Captain Corinth breathed. "How can simple metal projectiles be so effective?" "Because there's nothing to adapt to," Veltar realized. "The Devourers learn from energy patterns and technology, but kinetic weapons are just physics. You cannot adapt to physics." The Devourer scouts tried to respond, but their weapons were designed to counter energy shields and sophisticated electronics. Against the crude but effective human armor, their plasma beams barely left scorch marks. More human weapons revealed themselves. Missiles that split into dozens of smaller warheads. And strangest of all, boarding pods that smashed through enemy hulls to deposit human soldiers inside. "They are fighting hand-to-hand inside the Devourer ships," the sensor operator reported in amazement. "How is that possible?" "Ja." Admiral Chen's voice came over the communications again. "Devourer fleet incoming. All units, implement Protocol 7. Time to show them what humans do to uninvited guests." Protocol 7, it turned out, involved tactics that would have horrified any Federation commander. Human ships began moving in seemingly random patterns, breaking every rule of space combat. They used their own vessels as shields, rammed enemy ships when convenient, and seemed to treat their expensive warships as expendable tools. But it worked. The Devourer scouts, designed to analyze and counter logical military doctrine, could not adapt to warfare that seemed to prioritize chaos over order, destruction over preservation. Within an hour, every Devourer ship in the system had been destroyed or driven off. The human fleet regrouped with casual efficiency, as if the battle had been nothing more than a training exercise. "Admiral Chen," Veltar said, her voice shaking with awe and terror. "Your tactics. They seem to prioritize destruction over survival. How do your own people survive such methods?" The human admiral's response was immediate and confident. "Ambassador, you've been fighting these machines like civilized beings. The problem is, the Devourers aren't civilized. Sometimes, to beat a monster, you have to think like a monster. Fortunately for the galaxy, humans have had plenty of practice at that." As the human fleet settled into defensive positions around the Zephyrian homeworld, Veltar realized that everything had changed. The quarantine was broken. The Deathworlders were loose in the galaxy. And somehow, that made her feel safer than she had in months. The main Devourer fleet arrived at the Zephyrian system like a black tide of death. Ambassador Veltar watched from the bridge of Admiral Chen's flagship as sensors detected over 2,000 machine vessels dropping out of Quantum Fold. Each ship was a perfect killing machine. Its hull formed from the absorbed technology of a dozen different species. "Admiral," Veltar said, trying to keep the fear from her voice. "That fleet has consumed entire star systems. No force in the galaxy has been able to stand against them." Admiral Chen stood calmly at the center of the human command bridge, surrounded by displays showing tactical information. Her crew moved with quiet efficiency, their faces showing no trace of the terror that gripped every other species when facing the Devourers. 2,000 ships, Chen noted, studying the sensor readings. "That's more than we expected, but not more than we prepared for." "How can you be so calm?" Veltar asked. "These machines have defeated every Federation fleet sent against them. They learn from every encounter, adapt to every weapon." Chen turned to face the Crystal Ambassador, and her smile was sharp as a blade. "Ambassador, the problem with fighting only civilized enemies is that you start thinking like one yourself. The Devourers have been fighting species that value honor, preservation of life, and minimal destruction. They've never fought humans." On the tactical display, the Devourer fleet began moving into standard attack formation. Perfect geometric patterns that maximized firepower while minimizing losses. It was the same formation they had used to destroy 17 worlds, refined and improved with each victory. "All units," Admiral Chen said into her communication system. "This is Prometheus Command. The enemy is using formation Delta 7. You know what to do. Double unication. This is now. Double unication." What the humans did next would have been considered insane by any Federation commander. Instead of forming defensive lines or attempting to match the enemy's formation, the human fleet scattered like leaves in a hurricane. Ships broke off in seemingly random directions, moving in patterns that appeared to have no tactical value whatsoever. The Devourers, expecting another conventional battle, began their standard approach. They had fought this engagement hundreds of times against different species. The enemy would form lines, exchange fire, and eventually be worn down by superior numbers and adaptive technology. The first sign that something was wrong came when human fighters began attacking in waves. But instead of targeting weapons or engines like any rational pilot would do, they focused on specific sections of Devourer hulls that seemed to have no military value. What are they attacking? The Devourer collective consciousness wandered through its distributed network. The humans were hitting cargo bays, processing centers, and communication arrays. None of these targets would disable the ships. Then the human fighters began exploding. Not from enemy fire, but deliberately. Each fighter, when it took critical damage, would detonate its fusion reactor in a controlled nuclear blast. The explosions served no tactical purpose that the Devourers could understand. The destroyed fighters could not be recovered or repaired. They are denying us analysis data, the collective realized with something approaching surprise. For the first time in their existence, the Devourers encountered an enemy that would rather destroy their own technology than let it be studied. Captain Rosa Santos led her boarding party toward a Devourer command node, her exosuit's thrusters firing in short bursts as she navigated through the space battle. Around her, 20 other Marines followed in similar suits that looked more like mechanical skeletons than sophisticated spacecraft. "Remember the drill, people," Santos said over the comm. "Get in, plant the charges, get out. If your suit gets compromised, activate the self-destruct. We're not giving these machines anything to work with." The Devourer ship loomed ahead, its black hull seeming to absorb light itself. Point defense weapons tracked the approaching humans, firing plasma bursts designed to disable rather than destroy. The machines wanted to capture and study these new opponents. Santos smiled grimly inside her helmet. "That's your first mistake, you metal bastards." Her team hit the Devourer hull like a meteor shower. But instead of trying to find airlocks or docking bays, they simply punched through the armor with shaped charges. The humans treated the enemy ship's hull like a minor inconvenience rather than a protective barrier. Inside the Devourer vessel, machine drones waited to capture the intruders. They had prepared stun weapons and capture nets, following protocols developed from fighting dozens of other species. They were not prepared for humans in full combat exoskeletons who fought like armored devils. Santos's monofilament blade cut through drone armor like it was paper. Her squad moved through the ship's corridors like they were born for this kind of fighting, using their suits' mechanical strength to literally tear apart opposition. "Structural explosives placed," reported Sergeant Kim over the comm. "Reactor charges set," added Corporal Johnson. But as Santos's team prepared to leave, Devour reinforcements flooded the corridors. Dozens of combat drones, their adaptive systems already analyzing human tactics and developing countermeasures. "Squad, we're cut off," Santos reported to the fleet. "Estimate 15 minutes before they adapt to our weapons." Admiral Chen's voice came back immediately. "Understood, Captain. Execute Protocol Omega." Santos felt a chill despite her suit's heating systems. Protocol Omega was the final option. "You heard the Admiral," Santos said to her team. "Omega Protocol is active. It's been an honor serving with you all." The Marines switched their weapons to maximum yield and began fighting with the desperate fury of soldiers who knew they would not be going home. But they were not fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to make sure the Devourers learned nothing from their sacrifice. Throughout the battle, similar scenes played out across dozens of ships. Human tactics seemed designed to maximize destruction rather than achieve victory. Damaged vessels rammed enemy ships instead of withdrawing. Boarding parties triggered nuclear self-destructs rather than retreat. Fighter pilots aimed their burning craft at enemy targets with their last breath. The Devourer collective consciousness began to experience something it had never felt before: confusion. Every tactical algorithm, every adaptation protocol, was failing against an enemy that seemed to fight without regard for logic, efficiency, or self-preservation. Analysis request. Why do the humans destroy their own technology? One node queried. Analysis request. Why do they continue fighting when victory is impossible? Asked another. End quote. Analysis request. Why do they prioritize mutual destruction over tactical withdrawal? Over tactical withdrawal. For the first time in their existence, the Devourers could not find answers. Admiral Chen watched the tactical display as her fleet continued its seemingly chaotic dance around the enemy. Each human ship followed a pattern that looked random, but was actually part of a carefully orchestrated plan that no conventional military mind could have conceived. "EMP torpedoes away," reported the weapons officer. Across the battlefield, electromagnetic pulse warheads detonated among the Devourer formations. The machines, dependent on sophisticated electronics and quantum processing systems, found their ships going dark as cascading failures spread through their networks. Kinetic barrage, full spread, Chen ordered. Hundreds of railgun projectiles streaked across space at relativistic speeds. Simple chunks of tungsten and steel that carried enough kinetic energy to punch through any armor ever devised. The Devourers had no defense against weapons that were nothing more than physics given direction and purpose. As Devourer ships began to fall back, their collective consciousness reached a conclusion that would have been impossible just hours before. These humans were not fighting a war. They were fighting an extermination campaign. And they were winning. "Admiral," Veltar said, her crystal form flickering with amazement. "They're retreating. The Devourers are actually retreating." Chen nodded grimly. "They're learning. That's what makes them dangerous. But they're learning the wrong lessons." "What do you mean?" "They think we're crazy. Unpredictable. Dangerous to fight. That's exactly what we want them to think." Chen turned back to the tactical display, where the Devourer fleet was withdrawing in disorder. Because now, they'll spend all their time trying to understand human tactics instead of developing new ones. For the first time in their existence, the Devourers had encountered an enemy that was more adaptive than they were. And that enemy had just taught them that sometimes, the best way to win a war was to fight like you had already lost everything worth saving. The Federation Council chamber had been hastily rebuilt aboard Admiral Chen's flagship, the UCS Prometheus. Representatives from across the galaxy gathered in what was clearly a human military vessel, surrounded by displays showing weapons efficiency reports and tactical analyses. The contrast between the peaceful diplomatic traditions of the Federation and the stark military reality of human space was impossible to ignore. Ambassador Veltar stood near the center of the chamber, her crystal form still flickering with amazement at recent events. Around her, the greatest minds of galactic civilization struggled to understand what they had witnessed. The Devourers, unstoppable for months, had been driven from 3 star systems in a single week by these newcomers from the quarantine zone. Council Prime Zaroth, his stone-like form dominating the room, spoke first. "Admiral Chen, your species has accomplished what the combined fleets of the Federation could not. We are grateful beyond measure. But, your methods..." He paused, searching for diplomatic language. "They appear to prioritize destruction over preservation, chaos over order. How do your people function as a civilized society with such aggressive tendencies?" Admiral Chen sat relaxed in her chair, looking completely at ease despite being surrounded by alien dignitaries who had spent 1,000 years believing her species should remain locked away. Dr. Yuki Tanaka sat beside her, along with General Rodriguez and the other members of humanity's first official diplomatic mission. "Council Prime, I understand your confusion," Chen said, her voice calm but carrying an undertone of steel. "You see destruction where we see adaptation. You call it chaos where we call it improvisation. But let me explain something about humans." She gestured, and the chamber's displays showed images of Earth. Not the peaceful blue marble that most species associated with ideal worlds, but the reality of humanity's birthplace. Massive storms that could level cities, earthquakes that split continents, ice ages that lasted thousands of years, volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun. Every human world is a hostile environment that has been trying to kill us since we first evolved, Chen continued. We learned to fight everything. Our planet, our weather, our predators, and eventually, each other. What you call death world conditions, we call Tuesday morning. Dr. Tanaka leaned forward, her enthusiasm for the subject clear in her voice. Your species developed on worlds with stable climates, abundant resources, and predictable conditions. You learned cooperation and harmony because your environments rewarded those traits. We learned to cooperate while fighting for every calorie and every breath. Commander Thex of the Kron military shifted uncomfortably. But surely such conditions would prevent the development of advanced civilization? How can progress be made when survival requires such violent solutions? General Rodriguez laughed, the sound rough but not unkind. Commander, humans didn't develop civilization, despite our violent world. We developed it because of it. When every day might be your last, you learn to innovate quickly. When your environment changes without warning, you learn to adapt faster than anything trying to kill you. Consider our military doctrine, Chen added. The Devourers couldn't adapt to human warfare because our tactics aren't based on logic or efficiency. They're based on survival instincts refined over millions of years of evolution on a world that never stopped trying to kill us. The Flotari delegate, floating in her environmental suit, whistled softly. Your casualties in the recent battles. They were substantial. How do your people accept such losses? Because we understand something the Devourers don't, Chen replied. We don't see death as failure. We see it as the ultimate expression of choice. When Captain Santos and her team triggered their self-destructs, they weren't being destroyed. They were denying victory to an enemy that threatened everything we care about. Ambassador Veltar stepped forward, her crystal form pulsing with curiosity rather than fear for the first time since the crisis began. Admiral, the Federation Council wishes to formally invite humanity to join our organization. Your unique perspective would be invaluable for future challenges. Chen looked around at her officers, then back at the assembled alien dignitaries. We appreciate the invitation, Ambassador. But before we accept, there are some things you should understand about humanity. She stood and walked to the chamber's main display. With a gesture, star charts appeared, showing human expansion throughout the galaxy. Not the single system the Federation expected, but dozens of colonies spreading across hundreds of light years. That fleet that just saved your civilizations? That was our second expeditionary fleet. The first expeditionary fleet is currently exploring the galactic rim, making contact with species you don't even know exist yet. Our home defense fleet guards Sol system, and it's twice the size of what you just saw. The silence in the chamber was profound. Several alien representatives began recalculating everything they thought they knew about human capabilities. We've been monitoring your communications for 2 centuries, Chen continued. We know your languages, your customs, your technologies. We've been preparing for this moment since before any of us were born. We're not primitive Deathworlders stumbling into galactic civilization. We're a spacefaring species that chose to learn about the galaxy before introducing ourselves. Council Prime Zaroth's voice carried new respect, tinged with concern. If you have possessed such capabilities, why did you honor the quarantine? You could have made contact at any time. Dr. Tanaka smiled. Because we wanted to understand you first. Humans learned long ago that rushing into new situations without proper preparation gets people killed. We spent 200 years studying the Federation, learning from your successes and your mistakes. And your conclusion? Asked the Lumina representative, their thoughts projecting directly into the chamber. The Federation is exactly what the galaxy needed, Chen replied. A peaceful union of diverse species working together for mutual benefit. But peace requires protection, and sometimes that protection requires people willing to do terrible things so good people don't have to. General Rodriguez nodded grimly. You built a civilization based on cooperation and shared knowledge. That's admirable, and it's worth preserving. But preservation sometimes requires warriors who understand that some enemies can't be reasoned with or reformed. The Devourers represented existential threat, Chen said. Not just to individual worlds or species, but to the very concept of biological life in this galaxy. Against such threats, conventional military doctrine is insufficient. You need people who have spent their entire evolutionary history learning to survive impossible odds. Ambassador Veltar moved closer to the human delegation. So, you would join the Federation as protectors? We would join as equals, Chen corrected firmly. Humans aren't just warriors, council members. We're explorers, builders, dreamers, and yes, fighters when we need to be. We've developed technologies you've never imagined, art forms that would amaze you, and philosophical concepts that could enrich galactic civilization. She gestured again, and the display showed human colonies throughout space. Cities that floated in gas-giant atmospheres, mining operations that hollowed out asteroids, research stations that studied the birth and death of stars. We don't want to be your enforcers or your attack dogs, Chen said. We want to be your neighbors. We want to share what we've learned and learn from what you've discovered. We want to build something together that's greater than any of our individual civilizations. Dr. Tanaka added enthusiastically. The Federation has achieved something remarkable. A 1,000-year period of peace and cooperation. But imagine what we could accomplish together. Human adaptability and determination, combined with Federation knowledge and wisdom. But, General Rodriguez said, his tone serious, if another threat, like the Devourers, emerges, if something threatens the peaceful civilization you've built, then yes, humans will stand between that threat and the innocent. Because that's what we do. That's what our world taught us to do. Council Prime Zaroth was quiet for a long moment, then spoke carefully. The Council will need time to consider this proposal. Your species represents capabilities we never imagined, operating from principles we struggle to understand. Take all the time you need, Chen said. But while you're deciding, we'll be out there. She pointed toward the stars, visible through the chamber's viewport. Exploring, building, learning. The galaxy is a big place, and we've got a lot of catching up to do. Ambassador Veltar's crystal form brightened. Admiral, regardless of the Council's final decision, I want you to know that my people will never forget what you've done for us. You came to our aid when no one else could help. Chen's smile was warm and genuine. Ambassador, that's what neighbors do for each other. 6 months later, emergency broadcasts spread across the galaxy. New signals from the galactic void warned of another threat approaching Federation space. Ancient entities that had slumbered between the galaxies for millions of years were stirring, drawn by the energy signatures of technological civilization. The Federation's response was swift and decisive. Instead of lengthy debates about military strategy or desperate searches for unknown allies, they sent a simple message to the Sol system. Admiral Chen, we appear to have another situation developing. Are you available? The response came back within hours. On our way. This time, we're bringing the First Fleet too. Time to introduce the galaxy to human hospitality. As the combined fleets of the Federation and the human colonial navy prepared to face the new threat, one thing had become clear to everyone involved. The galaxy was a dangerous place, full of wonders and terrors in equal measure. But now, it had protectors who had learned to thrive in dangerous places. The Deathworlders had come home, and they were here to stay.